So here we are. This is the second lecture in Chapter 2, and Chapter 2 is on choices. Now, what is the economic problem? We live in a world of scarce resources. So this is, because we live in a world of scarce resources, we are obligated to make choices. And that's why the second chapter is on choices. Okay? And but I've got a video for you from Wall Street Live. I think we're in an ad here. Well, maybe not, but I think you're going to find this interesting.
Ms. Holman Jenkins Jr. stays with the show. Holman, we've had a little bit of a recovery in the market today, but that was a pretty painful fall. A lot of fear out there. Is it warranted?
Yeah, I think the market is really rendering a verdict on the policy mix of the last 8 years, which is monetary policy, monetary policy, monetary policy, and no real supply-side reform. So now Japan...
Now, that really, you asked me a question about Austrians and Keynesians, and, he mentions no supply-side reform. Now, supply-side would be more of an Austrian thing. Remember, Keynesian economics is all about demand. And through demand can be influenced by way of monetary policies and fiscal policies. Now we're going to talk about monetary policies. We've got a whole chapter on that coming up. We've got a whole chapter on fiscal policies. But mainly monetary policies are policies of the Federal Reserve, and they can monitor the nation's money supply, all right? And fiscal policies are policies of the federal government, and they can influence demand. Okay, so both monetary policies and fiscal policies are part of Keynesian economics. And when he says supply-side reform, well, that would be things that Austrians would be more in favor of, like lowering taxes and encourage savings. Lowering taxes particularly on those people who can invest, that can grow the economy. So what he's saying is that we're relying almost exclusively, because policymakers of the world today are Keynesians. I could even say all of them, but I don't know of any exception. They're all Keynesians, and so they're all in favor of doing what they do to influence demand. But what he's saying is that they're neglecting the supply side of the equation. The supply side would be encourage saving and then encourage investing, which would increase supply. See, that's why that would be an Austrian thing.
In Europe have gone to negative interest rates, which was supposed to drive down their currencies and get consumers and businesses borrowing and spending. It hasn't worked in either country because...
Now, negative interest rates, the world is going toward negative interest rates. Even America now, even though interest rate, the Federal Reserve raised the federal funds rate a month ago by 1/4 point. Now Janet Yellen, the chairman of the Federal Reserve, is talking about the possibility of bringing negative interest rates to America, doing a 180-degree turnaround. Instead of raising rates now, maybe now we should lower rates below zero. Now, what is negative interest rates? That means that if you put money, $1,000 in the bank, then you're guaranteed to get back maybe, $980. A negative interest rate is that the bank charges you interest. So when you put savings in a bank, then you're guaranteed to get less back than you put in, not even counting inflation. Okay, and is that an Austrian thing or a Keynesian thing? Well, Austrians are in favor of encouraging savings. So when you discourage savings through negative interest rates, that's strictly a Keynesian policy. Thinking is that if we discourage people from saving, which you do with negative interest rates, then you encourage them to spend more, which is a demand thing. See, we're trying to, the leaders are trying to encourage people to spend more. which is a Keynesian way of looking at the world. There's a question over here.
I was just going to ask, does that include checking accounts? Or is it
Yeah,
strictly
yeah.
savings?
No, it'd be any money in the bank. I believe now. The question was, would that include checking accounts? I'm guessing it would include checking accounts, but because we've never done it, in fact, the world has never done it until recently. We're in uncharted waters here, so it's really hard for me to say for sure. But that's a good question.
Consumers and businesses look at this crazy policy mix and they just don't have confidence in the future. So even if interest rates are zero, they don't want to borrow. So, the whole policy mix is just not working. And it sounds bad when people at the Fed are quoted saying that, we'll consider negative rates here too if this country goes into a recession, as looks increasingly likely, because it just doesn't work.
Well, we have an editorial up on WSJ.com. It's called Yellen in the Markets, and we go into some details about this argument. Holman, for the viewer out there that isn't the economist or in the financial industry, why don't negative interest rates work? Because you look at the policy and you think, well, if I have to pay money to keep my cash at the bank, I wouldn't do that. I'd go out and spend it. Why aren't people doing that?
Well, that's right. It still hasn't trickled through to consumers yet, the negative rates. The banks are having to pay negative rates when they lend, or earn negative rates when they lend to government. And since that's mostly how banks make their money, they're not making any profits. That's why bank shares have taken a whack this week. If negative rates trickle through to the consumer, then the consumer will, like you say, will have the incentive to spend or the incentive to put their money in a mattress or buy gold bars. You're going to try and hold on to that money if you think the world situation is just going to get worse and worse, no matter.
Now, that of course is the danger with negative interest rates. People are discouraged from putting money into the bank, and so what will a lot of them start to do? They will start to hoard their money, right? Which would not be good for demand. So now here's a critical point. Looking at Frederick Hayek, we talked about Frederick Hayek, we talked about the road to serfdom. Now what is the road to serfdom according to Hayek? The road to serfdom is planning. We talked about this before, right? Planning. The whole idea of Frederick Hayek and the Austrian economics is that once you have a planned economy, then in order for the plan to work, you have to force some people to participate in the plan. Now, what's one example of that we've talked about before? It's our healthcare system, right? Our healthcare system now. If you don't have insurance, what happens? You are obligated to pay a penalty, correct? Right? See, we got a plan. Oh, but now we got to force people to abide by the plan. All right, now we got negative interest rates. So that's a plan, right? I mean, it's not the market dictating lower rates, but we have a plan, and part of the plan is to have negative interest rates. But when you have negative interest rates, then more people may hoard their money, so what do we have to do? We have to force them, or at least make it more difficult for them to save money. So how do we do this? Well, that brings us to another article in today's paper. It says the political war on cash. What they're now doing is that they're going to eliminate high denomination bills. Europe has already eliminated many of their high denomination bills. There's talk that the United States will eliminate the $100 bill, will take it out of circulation. So what is the purpose of taking high denomination bills like $100 bills out of circulation? Because when you take cash out of the economy, especially high denomination bills, it makes it more difficult for people to put their money in a mattress. If the highest denomination you've got is a 20, it takes 5 times more 20s than it does a $100 bill. It makes it more difficult for people to hoard money. So we have to force people, or not force, we've got to make it more difficult for people so that more participate in the plan. You see how that works? So now, this is one step toward a cashless society, because if we eliminate currency totally and have only a virtual system, then the government can control. People can't just can't have cash and put money in the mattress, because just like gold and silver, which is it's against the law to use gold and silver as a currency, the government will ban dollar bills as currency, and therefore people cannot voluntarily stuff their money in a mattress. It gives the government more control, which is the whole. If you have a plan, you've got to have more control over people so that the plan will work. See, this is exactly what Frederick Hayek was talking about in his book, The Road to Serfdom, written, by the way, in 1944. There was a question here?
What's the difference? You said they're making it harder, but that's actually forcing them to do it. To not be able to.
Well, the first step, if you eliminate currency, you're actually forcing people, but the first step is to eliminate the high denomination bills, like $100 bills.
That's in a way still forcing it, because, you're basically not giving them a choice to be able to save their money.
Right, exactly.
That's the
whole point.
The whole situation is forcing.
That's the whole point. Anytime you have a plan, you've got to force people to participate in the plan. See, that's the whole idea of Frederick Hayek and Austrian economics. They're
dictatorship, basically.
Doesn't Austrian
Yeah.
economics stem from socialism and communism or something?
The what now? What was that? I think it's the opposite.
Well, I read something that one of them stems from socialism or something.
Now, Keynesians are more socialistic. Austrians are more free market. It's the opposite.
I got a question.
Yeah.
Is you say free what are you talking about? Do you think that taxes, the inversions, people pretty much evading taxes, like the large companies going over to places like Denmark, places like that?
Yeah.
Is that sort of the reason that it's a good thing to actually have negative
interest rates?
Yeah, interest rates, because if I'm going to Denmark, if I say, I'm Subway or something like that, and I go to Denmark, don't they have something called a Denmark sandwich or something of that nature, where I can pretty much just have a fake business or just an office somewhere, and then I take that there and then I move it to the aisles, and then I move it around, pretty much moving the money. And so if you say, if you're going to have your money here and you're saving it, then I'm going to at least make some type of.
That's an excellent question. He mentioned inversions. See, inversion is the process where businesses, like an American business, will merge with a foreign business and then move their domicile, the official center of their business, to that foreign country and then only be obligated to the tax laws of that foreign country instead of America. Now, how that fits in with negative interest rates, I would have to think about. I haven't thought that one out. That's a good question, though, but I can't answer it. That takes some thought. See, economics it's logic. You gotta kind of think things through. It's cause and effect. And anyway, this is an article here, The Political War on Cash. It says, these are strange monetary times with negative interest rates and central bankers deemed to be masters of the universe. So maybe we shouldn't be surprised that politicians and central bankers are now waging war on cash. That's right. Policymakers in Europe and the U.S. want to make it harder to hold actual currency. And then it explains how they've already put limits on cash in Europe. The real reason the war on cash is gearing up now is political. Politicians and central bankers fear that holders of currency could undermine their brave new monetary world of negative interest rates. See, that's what I was talking about. That's the the real reason to eliminate cash. It says here, they may go after the big bills now, but does anyone think that stopped there? Why wouldn't they eventually ban all cash transactions, much as they've banned gold and silver as a medium of exchange? Anyway, interesting article in today's paper called The World War on Cash. But let's finish this video here, because all this is tied in together.
How low rates go or how much money the government gives away, you can't make people spend it if they'd rather hoard it. And that's the case both in Europe and in Japan. Consumers and businesses aren't borrowing, they're hoarding.
David Malpass, a frequent contributor to our pages, had an op-ed out this week titled "Don't Blame the Fed's Baby Interest Rate Step," essentially making the argument that the Fed is paying businesses not to lend. These are the businesses, of course, that create jobs and real economic growth. Do you agree?
Yeah, his argument basically is that all what we sort of casually refer to as money printing is actually just money that stays on the Fed's balance sheet as reserves held by the banks. So the banks don't use this money to stimulate lending for businesses and consumers. They just earn money that they park at the Fed, and so that pumps up.
See, the point is that through quantitative easing, and he mentions QE here in just a minute. When he mentions QE, you know, that stands for quantitative easing. And remember, quantitative easing is when the Federal Reserve creates money to buy bonds, mostly government bonds, but other bonds as well. And when they create money, then that goes into banks. But why isn't that getting out into the public? Well, banks are reluctant to lend money out at such low interest rates when they can park money at the Federal Reserve and get a guaranteed interest rate that is good as they could get by taking a risk and lending money to people to buy cars and houses and things like that. Plus, they can put their money into the derivatives market and where the potential returns are far greater than lending money out. So despite QE, despite quantitative easing, this money has not gotten down into the pockets of the American consumer, you and me.
Bank profits that does nothing for the economy. That has been one of the flaws in QE in this country. I think he's right that the Fed's little interest rate hike didn't account for this big blow-off in the world markets. I think you got bigger things out there. The failure of Europe and Japan to deal with their problems, the fact that slow growth has destroyed the oil price, and that's hurt a lot of countries. So, and then you got all this debt out there, which we talk about every week. You've got huge amounts of debt. If that starts coming due and they can't pay it, that blows back on the whole world economy.
And you think we could see a recession and central bank meltdown, Holman?
It's entirely possible, especially if China gives up the ghost on defending its currency and you get a real currency war out there, then it could.
Now, what is a currency war? A currency war is when one country takes action to lower the value of their currency. Now, why does a country want to lower the value of their currency? Because when a currency goes down in value, its products become less expensive to foreigners. Foreigners buy more from that country, money flows in, and that generates jobs and growth. Okay? So what is a currency war? What a currency war is, well, country A lowers the value of their currency in order to encourage growth, but then that hurts other countries, so country B lowers the value of their currency in order to try to bring in more money from foreign countries, and then that hurts other countries, so country C lowers the value of their currency, and that is what a currency war is. And we are right now in the midst of a currency war worldwide. Yeah.
How do you go about lowering your currency?
Well, you guys are really asking some great questions. Now we have a whole chapter coming up, that will help explain that. But that's an excellent question. How do countries? It really depends. For example, China actually pegs the value of their currency to the dollar. So all China has to do is change the peg amount, and they can change the value of their currency. Now, countries like the United States, It's a different matter because we don't peg our currency to another currency. We let market, in theory, we let market forces determine the value of our currency, which is the demand and supply of the dollar in the international market. But we have ways to influence both the demand and supply of the dollar on the international market. And that would take a little bit of a lengthy discussion, which I'll go into that in detail in a later chapter. But essentially, there are ways to influence both the demand and supply of the dollar, and then in turn, and that's what's actually called a dirty float. A float, it means that we let the market determine the value of a country's currency. A dirty float would be where countries say, yeah, we'll let the market forces determine the value of our currency, but we're going to influence those market forces. But that really would take a lot of explanation. But that's an excellent question. That's shows that you're thinking about this stuff, which is really the whole point to this.
Be bad news all around.
Scary predictions. Holman Jenkins, thanks very much.
Okay, well.
Frank Abagnale.
Did y'all find that interesting?
Yeah.
Yeah, I did. Well, let's get back to these slides now, and I'll turn on my recorder here. So here we are. This is the second lecture on Chapter 2. Chapter 2 is on choices. And last time we were talking about the main causes, the main ideas of the Declaration of Independence. So I'm going to start here with, let's see, I'll go to slideshow and from current slide. So this is exactly where we, I left off at the previous slide. So what is the biggest threat to our freedom? Well, the biggest threat to anyone's freedom is the centralization of power. Okay, anything that leads to a once power becomes centralized, then any person or group can gain power, and then the population loses their personal freedom. So the biggest threat to our freedom is centralized power. So how does our Constitution protect our freedom? Well, if the biggest threat to our freedom is centralized power, then the only way to protect ourselves from centralized power is to have a system where power is decentralized. So how do we do that? Well, what all that the Constitution does is it says the President of the United States has these powers, the Senate has these powers, the House of Representatives has these powers, the Supreme Court has these powers. So states have these powers. So as long as power, bye-bye, Dimitri. Yeah, he told me he had to leave early. So as long as power is not centralized, as long as we have a system where it's decentralized, then we protect ourselves from a dictator, in essence, you see. And so that's exactly what this is why the Constitution is so important. The Constitution is the only thing that protects us from dictatorial power. Does that make sense? There's a lot of people who don't understand this, but it's extremely important. So what are the three branches of government? President, Congress, House, Senate, Supreme Court. I didn't mention, but that's again, the Supreme Court has certain powers. That's why the Judge Scalia just died a couple of days ago, and it's going to have a profound influence because there are liberals and conservatives on the Supreme Court, and we're pretty much an even balance. But with Scalia dying, who was the leader of he was a bedrock conservative.
How did he die again?
Good question. Yeah, a heart attack, I suppose. I'm not sure, but he died in his sleep. Yeah. Anyway, that's good. That's along with this election coming up, the fact that now we have a vacancy in the Supreme Court is, I mean, this is a huge thing here. Major things are going to happen this year, and it'll decide which way this country goes. Whether it goes farther into the Keynesian camp of more government, bigger government, or it goes the other way of the Austrian way. I mean, I'd hate to make a prediction, but we are on a crossroads in terms of a country this year. What is the unofficial branch of our political system? The free press. The press is the only business that's actually protected by the Constitution. In fact, it's imperative that in a democracy, people have to have knowledge, and it is the obligation of the free press to report honestly, and so that people have the facts and know the truth. And that is why once a group wants to gain power, their first step is to control the news media, because if you control the news media, then you can control events. See, what is an economic system? A set of social institutions and mechanisms organized to answer three economic questions. And the three questions are, what do we produce? For whom do we produce? And how do we produce? And in a free market economy, it is the market that determines what is produced and who gets what and how much, basically. So what is a command economy? An economic system characterized by public ownership of resources and centralized economic planning. Now, in a true command system, the government would actually decide what to produce and who gets what and how much. See, now we don't have anything, we don't have that in the United States. I mean, we are moving in direction over the previous years of an ever larger federal government, but we're certainly not to the place where the government actually determines, well, not in a totality, what is produced. Now, in a minor way it does, by subsidizing certain industries that they favor and making it more difficult in other industries. There's a war on coal. Coal companies are going bankrupt because of government policy, but yet people in other areas like solar energy are getting subsidies. So in this way, the government is greatly influencing what is being produced. They discourage coal, they encourage solar energy. Now, I'm not saying that is a good policy or bad policy. What I'm saying is that this it's the nature of government control. It's not a free market situation. That's what I'm saying. But what is pure capitalism? An economic system characterized by private ownership of resources and the use of prices to coordinate economic activity in unregulated markets. And I think, let's see. Okay, well, let me talk about the price mechanism. What do we have the price mechanism in the banking industry? Do we have a free market in our banking industry? No, we don't. Does the free market determine interest rates? No, it doesn't. See, we have a command. The interest rates are as low as they are today because of our monetary policies. See, not the free market did not dictate these lower interest rates. Okay. Now, price signals. A free market can only work if price signals are clear. Now, I've talked about before, and I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit, but remember there are three roles that prices play in the economy. Okay, the first role is prices give the producer knowledge of what consumers want. Because if you put something out on the market and a lot of people want it and they bid against one another and the price goes up, now it's not the business owner that's raised the price, but it's the market, it's people bidding against one another in the market that's raised the price. What signal does the consumer give to the producer? Hey, we want more. Now, if something is put out on the market and not very many people want it, and therefore in order to sell it, retail store owners lower the price. Now again, is it the business that's lowering the price? No, it's the retail store owners lowering the price. It's out there in the market where the prices are going down. It's because of the actions of consumers that's leading to lower prices. Well, when the price goes down, what information is conveyed to the producer? The information is, hey, we want less. So when prices go up or down, that conveys information to the producer, but it also gives the producer an incentive to give consumers what consumers want. Because if the price goes up, and we're assuming here that everything else is the same, like costs stay the same, so when the price goes up, the producer has an incentive to produce more of that product because more money can be made, higher profits can be made as the price goes up. So the producer produces more of those things that people want. Now, if people don't want very much of something and the price goes down, the producer makes less money, so he has an incentive to produce less because he can make less money on these products. So I mean, so the change in the prices in the economy give incentives to the producer, either to produce more or to produce less. And thirdly, if consumers want more, if something's put out in the market and consumers bid the price up, and the consumers are saying we want more, and the business is saying, oh well, we have an incentive to give you more because we can make more money now because of the higher prices, but it's going to cost us more money to hire people and to buy machines and build more factories. Where's that money going to come from? Well, it comes from the higher prices. So higher prices give the business owner the wherewithal, the ability, financial ability to give consumers what consumers want. And this is how prices work in a free market system. Now, what do negative interest rates do? What negative interest rates do is it distorts the price mechanism. See? Now, when you have more government policies that dictate prices, as we do in the banking industry, it distorts the signals, and therefore there's more confusion because the price mechanism is not allowed to work. This is why a couple months ago, Janet Yellen, as I just mentioned, chairman of the Federal Reserve, raised interest rates a little bit, and now they're talking about lowering interest rates. Well, how come a big change in just a short time? Well, because the price signals out there are so blurred that people are confused, and their price signals are blurred because instead of letting the market dictate prices, we have a planned system, and the system is dictating prices instead of the market. So what is an oligarchy? Power by a group that dictates the rule of man in an oligarchy. Okay, just that she told me she had to leave early, so I appreciate that. Power by a group dictates the rule of man in oligarchy. Decisions are centralized. See, in reality, you never have a dictator because you always have people who are in support of that dictator. You have a group. If you have dictatorial power, it's in a group. And so in reality, we would talk about an oligarchy. An oligarchy is ruled by a few. But even though it's ruled by, well, because it's ruled by a very few, decisions are centralized. That's an oligarchy. Now, what is crony capitalism? A system where success in business depends on close relationships between big business and government. So you might think, well, we have a free market system, but if it's big business that influences government policy, then we really don't have capitalism. We have what is called crony capitalism. Crony capitalism is where big business has a working relationship with leaders in government, and so they act together as a team, mostly to the detriment of everybody else. That's called crony capitalism. And what makes for crony capitalism, rent seeking, we've talked about before. What's one of the reasons why, when we buy gasoline, 10% of it or so is from corn? Well, a big reason for that is the rent seeking. We got corn farmers that gain from the higher price, gain from the government buying, more corn for gasoline. So they, through rent seeking in the past, they have influenced legislation and convinced Congress to put corn in our gasoline. That's one of the reasons for ethanol. Okay, it's because of rent seeking by the lobby group of certain farmers. And what is moral hazard? Occurs when businesses are insulated from risk and therefore are encouraged to take undue risks. When we had the financial collapse in 2007, what happened? I mean, did those big banks that made huge risks and lost billions of dollars, did they take the fall? Did they bear the cost of that? No, government bailed them out. The government took money from taxpayers and gave it to the bankers. Okay, and so when bankers feel, well, no matter what we do, we can take high risks, and even if things go bottom up, the government simply bail us out, then there's no reason to be careful. There's no reason to be careful. Now, we may not have another bailout the next economic downturn, but we'll have a bail-in. And now, what's the difference between a bail-out and a bail-in? A bail-out is when the government takes money and gives to banks. A bail-in is when banks take money from people's savings and our checking accounts. See, a negative interest rate is a form of bail-in. Okay, negative interest rates, when banks, what's one of the reasons for negative interest rates? Well, banks need more money, so negative interest rate is a way that banks can take money from depositors. And that's what a bail-in is. A bail-in is, well, if you have $10,000 in a savings account, then the bank takes all of it or part of that savings. See, legally, when you put money in the bank, the bank owns that money. You are no longer the legal owner of that money you have in the bank. And because legally the money is the bank's money, they can simply take it and it's totally legal. That's called a bail-in. Yeah, here's a question back here.
What would happen if we let those banks actually fail? If we didn't bail them off?
All right, then now that's another, man, you guys are really asking great questions. I'm so happy. The question was, what would happen if we let the banks, go bankrupt? Well, that would actually be the Austrian way of doing things. See, when a company goes bankrupt, the physical company doesn't disappear. All the machines are there, the buildings are there, the employees are there. Everything is still there. So what happens with bankruptcy law? If you let a company go bankrupt, what happens is that it goes to a judge, and a judge decides, who gets what and how much, but it's an orderly takedown of the company, at where most of it, or it depends on the situation, but the company may be sold all, or it may be cut up in pieces and sold piecemeal to different people, and the market will simply determine what price we can get. But the company itself would still survive, but in a different form, and that's what a lot of people, the Austrians. But if you go back to 2007, 2008, an Austrian economist would be totally against the bailouts, because they said that let the system. We've already got a mechanism in the system called bankruptcy law. Let the system take care, of this situation. Does that help answer?
A little bit.
Well, that's maybe as we go along, I'll answer more and more. But that's essentially, bankruptcy is an orderly takedown, reorganization of a company.
How that affect the economy, though, and how that would affect us individually?
Well, that depends on how many bankruptcies and how big they are. But whatever happened happened. I mean, if something bad happens, there's no magic pill that's going to make that bad thing go away. We're going to have to pay. We're going to have to pay the price to correct the situation one way or another. So, bankruptcy, an Austrian would say that if you just let the system do what it does, and let an orderly in a country that it has a rule of law, and part of that law is bankruptcy law, let the system take care of it. We don't need a special one-time deal where the government takes dramatic action.
So, for the government, what was the exact benefit of the bailout, of us actually using taxpayer money, just to keep those companies and everyone in
Well, it was, again, that's a good question. The whole point was to prevent banks from going bankrupt. The last chapter of the book is on the financial collapse of 2007, 2008. And what you're going to learn in chapter 12 is that banks took huge risks, and when their bets went bad, then the whole purpose of the bailouts was to protect banks. Now, there was a lot of illegalities, but there is not one banker that went to prison, because the laws protected, there are actual laws that protected bankers from any persecution, and they were given money to so that they didn't lose any money. See, it wasn't for the benefit of the, you and me. It was for the benefit of the big bankers. Now, officially, it was, well, we're doing this to protect a complete economic meltdown. But through bankruptcy laws, there was already an orderly way to take care of the situation. And part of the situation would be to persecute criminal activity in the banking system. But we never did that.
Are those people still there today?
Oh yeah, of course. They're still back up where they were and making 10 times more than they did back, in the 2000s. Yeah.
Wasn't back in the 1920s the Great Depression caused because the government didn't bail out the banks? So wasn't the bailout put in as precaution to not have another depression?
Man, you're hitting on something there too, boy. It's hard for me to talk about all this, but this is coming up. We have a whole chapter on, money and banking and the Great Depression and all that. But I think maybe what you're getting at is really the heart and core of a lot of this. In 1932, see, the Depression started, in the early 30s. And in 1932 or 33, we had what is called the Glass-Steagall law. And the Glass-Steagall law separated private banks from investment banks. Because one of the problems with the Great Depression is that private banks, commercial banks, were taking depositors' money and then taking huge risks with that money. Okay? So what the Glass-Steagall law did, they said, well, we're going to separate commercial banks with investment banks, and we're going to regulate commercial banks, but we're not going to regulate investment banks. Now, with investment bank, if you did business with investment bank, you would have to have a minimum, as an individual, you have to have a minimum of maybe $1 million. I mean, investment banks deal with wealthy people, period. And so the government said, well, wealthy people need a playground, so we won't bother with investment banks, because if people put the money, give $1 million or $10 million to an investment bank and the bank loses it, well, that's their money, and they, they've got lots of money anyway, and, they're grown-ups. But what happened in the early 2000s is because banks wanted to do what banks did back before in the early 30s, they convinced Congress to repeal the Glass-Steagall law. So in the early 2000s, it was made legal once again for banks to take depositors' money and put it at great risk. That's what you were referring to? Well, that's a wonderful. Boy, I tell you, if we could have questions like this, we could really be rocking in this class. That's really good. Any other questions? Okay, that's a moral hazard occurs when businesses are insulated from risk and therefore are encouraged to take undue risk. I mean, if you don't pay a penalty for your mistakes, then, what's the big deal? I mean, you might as well take big risk, because either you make a ton of money if you're right, and if you're wrong, well, you just get back your money anyway, so there's no risk involved. And that's called moral hazard. And we all know who Adam Smith was, the father of modern day economics, published The Wealth of Nations in 1776. We've talked about the invisible hand of the free market. And what is the invisible hand? The invisible hand, according, as Smith wrote, is self-interest. That everyone acting according to their own self-interest ultimately will satisfy the corporate interest. Now, I'm not going to go through that whole thing again, but we've talked about this before, right? About the role of self-interest in the market. As Adam Smith talked about the invisible hand of the free market. Now, what role do prices play? Okay, so I got ahead of myself. I knew I did, and I've already talked about this. What is a mixed capitalist economy? An economic system characterized by private ownership of some resources and public ownership of others. Some markets are regulated and others are not. So what we have in America is a mixed capitalistic economy. Okay, a mixed capitalistic economy. But it's still a capitalist economy. Now, if you have an economy that is basically capitalistic, then in order for that system to function, you need the buildup of capital. See, capitalist comes from the word capital. And what is capital in economics? Capital are the machines and tools used in the productive process to help solve the economic problem. That's what capital is. When a machine is used to produce something that is sold in the market in an attempt to solve the economic problem, that machine is what we call capital. And human capital are the skills that we learn here at New River to work with that capital. That's called human capital. But if you're going to have a capitalistic system, you need capital. Okay? And so, what do negative interest rates do? Well, they discourage capital. All right? They Well, it discourages capital. Let me say this. Let me tell you why. Where does the money come from to invest? Well, an Austrian would say it would come from savings. People earn, they save a part of what they earn, and then others can borrow that money, and then they can make investments. And that's how you grow the economy. All right? But if we have negative interest rates, what is the incentive for people to save? Well, the incentive to save goes down to nothing, right? I mean, if you put $1,000 in the bank and the bank says, well, I promise to give you back $900, that's not much incentive to save, correct? So how do the Keynesians, I mean, if investing is necessary to grow, and a capitalist economy needs a bill of capital to survive, and you discourage savings and therefore have less money that can be borrowed to make investments, then how do you grow? Well, where does the money come from? The money comes from quantitative easing. The money comes from thin air. The money comes, and instead of people working and saving, sacrificing and saving, building up savings and then borrowing these savings, we can discourage people from saving because we don't need people if we can simply create the money out of thin air. Does that make sense? That's a profound statement. Why have we modified the free market system? A free market cannot provide us with everything we need. Which I'll go into. To satisfy political goals, to make the system more fair. So what are some goals? In other words, a free market system cannot provide us with everything we need. So why do we have to modify the system? And this will help explain that. Well, there are goals anyway. One goal, of course, is growth. Why do we need growth? Because if we don't grow, tomorrow we have less than we have today, because things deteriorate in this physical world we live in, right? So we have to continually replace what we've got in order just to stand still. So if we discourage investing and discourage saving, now again, remember the Keynesians might simply, they support the creation of new money, but that's got its downside. I mean, that should be obvious that can't really be a good system over the long run.
Couldn't it work out? Couldn't you have negative interest rates at a cutoff, so there's a certain percentage of people who are, the billionaires?
Oh yeah. In fact, that's what it is. Again, that's an excellent question. Really, in reality, right at this point, that's what it is. With negative interest rates, only certain accounts are, like you say, upper income people or everyone's not treated the same with negative interest rates or with bail-ins either. When banks take money from people's accounts, well, it's not all accounts. They can say, well, money in an account that has over $50,000, over 50,000, or it could be anything. I mean, I'm just taking it out the top of my head. We can make the rules whatever we want. When you have a planned system, then somebody makes the rules, and the rules can be anything that the planners want. So it just depends. Anyway, growth is a goal. Full employment certainly is a goal. Now, to be unemployed, one has to be actively seeking employment. So our unemployment rate can be low, but we'll talk about this at a later point. But if more people drop out of the workforce and they simply quit looking for work, then the unemployment rate goes down, despite the fact that we may have more unemployed people. in reality. But anyway, full employment is a growth, however you define full employment. That was really my point. Stable prices, of course, would be a goal. Stable prices. Now, that's not necessarily in order for a free market system to function, prices have to be fluid. Prices have to be able to adjust to market forces. So with a good system, you might have some prices going up a lot, other prices going down a lot, some prices, not changing at all. So you can't look at, if we say stable prices, that's not to say that, all prices are going to increase by 1 or 2% a year. I mean, that would be stable, but that's unrealistic. Because the market system, in order for a market system to work, we have to let prices go up and down according to market forces. And market forces are different depending upon what part of the economy you're looking at. Economic efficiency, of course, would be a goal. Efficiency is, inputs, outputs. You put in so much, you get so much back. Remember, I talked to you about how if an American manufacturer goes to Mexico and pays a low wage, does that necessarily mean mean more profit for the producer? And the answer was, well, no, because you've got to consider output as well as input. The money you pay someone is input, but the output is what that person can produce. So efficiency is that outputs exceed inputs. That's and the more output supersedes input, then the more efficient the system. Now, one thing I didn't mention when I talked about that Mexican worker is I talked about how the American worker, even though you pay the American worker 5 times more than the Mexican worker, it may be cheaper to hire the American worker if the American worker is more productive, a lot more productive than the Mexican worker, because of the system that the American worker works in. But if you understand that, then what companies can go to foreign countries and take advantage of the low foreign wages? Companies that are producing something that is very labor intensive. If you're producing something that's very labor intensive and not capital intensive at all, then you may go to a foreign country and take advantage of those low foreign wages. But if you're producing something that is very capital intensive, then it may be more beneficial for you to stay in America and pay the higher wage, because your output more than makes up for the higher wage. Okay? And because we are a advanced industrial country where we have a lot of capital, to take advantage of, then companies that are producing something that's very capital intensive may benefit from staying here despite the higher wage paid here as compared to other countries. So fairness, if in a pure free market system, we might experience some gross uneven distribution of income and not an even playing field in terms of opportunity for everybody. So we have to modify the system in certain ways to make it more fair. Now, I'm not going to go into all the details, but basically, that is a good reason to modify a free market system to make it more fair. Another reason to modify a free market system is reduce negative externalities. A negative externality is the undesirable byproduct of the industrial process. We like the cars that Detroit produces, but we don't like the pollution that goes with them. The pollution is a negative externality. Okay, it's a negative, it's external to the main purpose, and it's negative to society. Pollution is negative to society. And there is no incentive in a free market system for businesses to, for example, to promote a clean environment because of competition. If a business puts a lot of money, their cost increase, but their competitors don't, if a business puts a lot of money to have a clean environment, but their competitors don't, then their competitors can underprice them in the market, and the business that has a social conscience will go out of business. And in that case, in a free market system where the government did not try to have laws to minimize negative externalities, we'd all be choking to death from pollution. So we have to modify the system in order to have a level playing field, so that all businesses have an incentive to do what they can to have a cleaner environment, because the laws that apply to one business applies to all businesses. So that's a good reason to modify a free market system to minimize negative externalities. Economic freedom is a goal. The American dream of if you work, America's always had a system whereby it was not a guarantee of equal income, but a guarantee of equal opportunity. That it's, people came to America not because in the past, not because they knew they would be given wealth, but they would be given no matter what your station in life, you would have the opportunity through hard work and sacrifice to attain the American dream, we call it. Okay, and that is economic freedom and economic security. A free market system may not provide for like unemployment insurance. There's lots of people that may become unemployed through no fault of their own, and so should we not, for social reasons, help them at least temporarily? And the answer would be yes, but there's also an economic reason for these policies. When we pay unemployment insurance to people, benefits, see, the last thing in the world that we want is for people to become unemployed and simply stop spending money. Because if demand goes down, that leads to more people becoming unemployed. So when these people become unemployed, if we pay them money through unemployment benefits, they continue to spend, and that prevents demand from falling as quickly as it would otherwise, which prevents unemployment from getting worse as quickly as it would otherwise. So when we pay people unemployment benefits, that may benefit the recipient of those benefits, but it also benefits society from preventing unemployment from falling through the floor. Does that make sense? So anyway, that's just one example of economic security. What is the most important goal? Because we live in a physical world, okay, this is where growth comes in. Because we live in the physical world, things deteriorate. And that is why that's why growth is so important. And the next chapter is on growth. This chapter is on choices. We got the economic problem, therefore we got to make choices. But our choices are minimized if we don't grow enough. So growth is a necessity, not an option, because things wear out from day to day. What leads to growth? Decreased costs, decreased price, increased sales, increased profits. How does the free market system work? Then here's how growth works in a free market system. Businesses, now remember, cost is a business term and price is a consumer term. Businesses lower costs, and when they lower costs, they lower prices. Why they lower prices? Because lower prices lead to higher profits. Why do lower prices lead to higher profits? Because you increase sales. Why did Sam Walton, what was the whole idea that Sam Walton had when he built Walmart? I mean, what's the deal with Walmart? What is their slogan? Low prices, right? Well, how is it that Sam Walton was able to sell the same merchandise that others were selling at lower prices because he was always finding ways to lower his costs. He was, if you read his, I read his biography once, if you read his biography, he was just consumed with finding ways to lower costs. Because when you lower costs, you can lower your price, right? You can sell more units, and by selling more units, you make more money. That's what made Walmart so successful. All right. So the name of the game in the free market is to lower costs, then lower prices. This will increase sales, and through the increase in sales, your profits will greatly increase. You know, Walmart is responsible for a huge, significant portion of American workforce is tied to Walmart in one way or another. Maybe not directly, but indirectly, a great part of our whole workforce is tied to Walmart. And that was through the idea of one man, Sam Walton, who found ways to lower costs. I mean, that was the beginning. And then to lower prices. Now, how does society gain from this? Well, with lower prices, we all can attain a higher standard of living. And lower prices means that sales go up, and that means more jobs. So if you lower costs and then lower prices, it's a win-win situation. The business wins through higher profits, the worker wins through more jobs and higher pay, at least the possibility of higher pay, and government gains because of the increase in growth leads to higher tax revenues. So it's a win-win situation. Everybody wins and nobody loses.
Where does the idea of purchasing power fit into this?
Well, purchasing power, that's a good question. Lower prices increases purchasing power. When prices go down, we can afford to buy more. That's an increase in purchasing power.
You lower the price, but that also means that you're lowering the standard of the product.
No, not necessarily. No, of course not. No,
Well,
no, not necessarily. I mean,
everything's made from China. It's like not
well,
real.
you can always think of. I mean, you can always come up with examples to make any point.
Yeah.
But the way the system works, and that's what we're talking about here in macroeconomics. The way the system works, a free market system, is you lower costs, prices. The business has an incentive to lower prices because that's what leads to higher profits. When prices go down, our buying power goes up, we buy more, and everyone gains. Business gains, the worker gains, the government gains. But the opposite happens when costs go up. If costs go up, right, then...
It's a better product if costs go up, and it's more efficient.
No, it's less efficient when costs go up.
This product's more efficient, because if you're buying something cheaper, it's just going to break.
Well, no, you're
days.
confusing cost and price. Cost is a business term, price is a consumer term. Cost is what a business pays to produce something, price is what you and I pay for it in the market. Okay? Let me see what's coming up. And increased jobs, all right. What two opinions concerning growth? Keynesians believe in macroeconomic policies of stimulating demand. Austrians believe in microeconomic policies to encourage saving and private investing to promote growth. So see, these are two quite different viewpoints. So I think this would be a good place to stop. I didn't get done with all these slides, but most of them. Anyway, this does end chapter 2. So y'all read chapter 3 for next time, right? Read chapter 3, and I'll start chapter 3 next time. So I'll see you all next time.